Please save my brother." The voice stopped him cold, sharp, and small, trembling against the icy wind outside St. Augustine Medical Center. Edward M. Blake, billionaire tech magnate, founder of Sold-In Systems, turned his head slowly. He had just stepped out of the hospital after a photo op for a new pediatric wing his foundation had funded. A day of check signing, shallow handshakes, and plastered smiles. He expected nothing but silence and cold as he made his way to his waiting Escalade. But instead, there was a little girl. No taller than his waist, she stood in a fraying coat and snow-stained boots, her cheeks red with cold, her braids disheveled and loose. Her gloves didn't match. Her teddy bear was clutched under one arm, the fur matted from years of use. "Please, sir," she repeated, tugging at his sleeve. "My brother's hurt. He fell, and now he won't wake up. The nurses said we gotta wait, but nobody's coming. They say he needs a heart thing, but they won't help him fast." Edward blinked, confused. "My name's Anna," she said quickly. "I'm 6. My brother Tobias is 9. We came here 'cause he fell on the stairs. He's sick inside. They said he's got something bad with his heart." She sniffled, trying to stand straighter, to be braver. "I thought maybe you could help. You're rich, right? Rich people get things done faster." Edward stared at her, not sure whether to be insulted or moved. "Anna, I'm not a doctor," he said gently. "But you have money, don't you?" she said without blinking. "And people listen to money." Behind her, just inside the hospital lobby, someone shouted, "We need a nurse here now." Anna's eyes widened in panic. "That's him. That's Tobias." She turned and ran. Edward followed, his long strides closing the distance quickly. Inside, a boy lay on the tile floor near the nurse's station, his body limp, legs twisted beneath him. His lips were turning pale, his chest rose shallowly, his fingers twitching. 2 orderlies hovered near him, unsure what to do. A young nurse was on the phone, her voice tight with worry but offering no urgency to her tone. "Where is the crash team?" Edward barked. "He's a child, for God's sake." "We're waiting on a supervisor," the nurse replied, glancing at him but not moving from behind the counter. Edward's voice sharpened into steel. "You're waiting for what? An approval form? A golden ticket?" "He's unconscious on your floor." Anna was on her knees beside Tobias, patting his face gently. "Toby, wake up. Please wake up." A second nurse approached, this one older and clearly more experienced. But even she hesitated at the sight of Edward's furious expression. "Get a gurney," he ordered, his voice low, dangerous. "Right now, or I swear, I'll have this hospital's board in federal court before sunrise." There was a shift in the air, a hush, authority, real and earned, settled like gravity. Within seconds, Tobias was lifted onto a stretcher, oxygen brought to his lips, and a resident rushed over to assess. But Edward could see hesitation still lingered in their eyes, the kind that only shows up when the patient is poor. Or black. Or both. Anna gripped Tobias's hand the entire time, whispering softly to him as the staff wheeled him down the hall toward intensive care. She didn't cry, she just kept whispering. Edward stood back, fists clenched, breath visible in the cold air that still slipped through the automatic doors. The nurse who had delayed earlier looked up at him, recognizing who he was now. Her lips parted to speak. "Save it," Edward snapped. "You already said enough by standing still." He turned to Anna. "Is there anyone else here with you?" She shook her head. "Just me and him. Miss Jean, she lets us sleep at her house sometimes. But she's real old and can't come far." "You don't have insurance?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "No, sir," Anna said. "They asked for a card. I gave them the one Mama used to have, but it didn't work." Edward inhaled deeply. He felt it again, that damn ache he thought he'd buried 8 years ago. Julia, his daughter, lost to the same condition. Congenital heart failure. The same quiet slipping away, the same soundless suffering. Anna reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a yellow lollipop, dusty but still wrapped. She extended it toward him. "It's all I got," she said, "but I want you to have it, for helping Toby. If this story moved you, show your support. Like the video, leave a comment to share your thoughts, and subscribe for more powerful stories that matter. Edward looked at the candy, then at her. "You keep it," he said. "Give it to him when he wakes up." Anna smiled, tired, worn, but real. "I will." Edward didn't know why the lump in his throat was there, or why his hands trembled slightly as he tucked them back into his coat pockets. But something had changed. Not in the hospital. In him. And for the first time in years, the man who could buy anything realized there was one thing he hadn't purchased in a long, long time. A reason to care. The hallway outside the pediatric ICU smelled of antiseptic and unanswered prayers. Edward sat stiffly on the cold vinyl bench, staring at the closed double doors through which Tobias had disappeared minutes ago, minutes that already felt like hours. Anna sat beside him, her tiny frame hunched, feet swinging just above the floor. She clutched her teddy bear tightly, her fingers wrapped around its neck like she feared it would float away, but she wasn't crying. Edward glanced at her. No tears, just silence and stillness, like someone much older trapped in a 6-year-old's body. He had seen grief before, sudden, loud, messy. But this wasn't that. This was something heavier. Something that had settled into her bones a long time ago. "You don't have to be strong right now," Edward said quietly. She looked up at him, confused. "You can cry, Anna," he added. Anna shook her head slowly. "Crying doesn't help Tobias." There was no anger in her voice, no defiance, just fact. He turned away, throat tight. This child had more control than most adults he knew, and it was killing him inside. Across the hall, a nurse walked past and did a double take when she saw Edward. She leaned toward a colleague, whispering, "That's him, the tech guy. The billionaire." Anna heard it. She turned to Edward. "Are you really a billionaire?" Edward sighed. "I guess." Her brow furrowed. "So you could buy a lot of hearts if you wanted." He almost smiled, but it faltered. "Hearts aren't like iPhones. You can't buy them in bulk." Anna looked down, thoughtful. "Then why do people say rich people never die?" Edward blinked. "Who says that?" "Everybody," she replied. "They say if you have enough money, you get to live longer." He leaned back, folding his arms. "Money can buy doctors, it can buy hospitals, but it can't buy time, and it can't buy life." Anna didn't respond. She just sat, swinging her legs. Then, as if out of nowhere, she asked, "Did you ever lose someone?" Edward inhaled sharply. He considered lying, but the truth was already written across his face. "Yes," he said. "My daughter, Julia." Anna was quiet then. "Was she little like Tobias?" "She was 8. Anna nodded. "Did she have a teddy bear too?" Edward closed his eyes for a moment. "She had a stuffed rabbit. Its ears were always bent." "Did she die here?" Anna asked. Edward hesitated. "Number? In New York." "Oh." Anna leaned her head against the bench. "I bet they didn't make you wait." That hit harder than he expected. Before he could answer, the ICU doors swung open. A nurse stepped out, clipboard in hand, her face unreadable. Edward stood. "How is he?" The nurse glanced at Anna before speaking. "He's stable for now, but his heart function is deteriorating. We're preparing to transfer him to an external bypass. But we can't proceed further without a legal guardian's consent." I'll sign," Anna said quickly. The nurse blinked. "I'm sorry, sweetheart, but you're not old enough." "She's all he has," Edward cut in. "I understand, sir, but without next of kin or guardianship papers, we're limited in what procedures we can authorize." Edward's tone hardened. "So, let me guess, unless someone with insurance or a fancy lawyer shows up, you're just going to keep him sedated until it's too late?" The nurse flinched. "That's not fair." Neither is a child dying because of a technicality." There was a pause, a long one. "Is there anyone we can contact?" she asked finally. Anna shook her head. "Miss Jean, but she's real old. She can't come downtown." Edward pulled out his phone. "Get me your supervisor." "Sir, I'm not asking." The nurse hesitated, then walked briskly down the hall. Edward sat again. Anna was watching him closely. "Are you going to get mad at everyone who doesn't help us?" He paused. "I might." "No." Anna seemed to consider that. Then she whispered, "I'm glad." They sat in silence again. Finally, Edward turned to her. You hungry? She nodded, just once. He stood and offered a hand. Let's go find something edible in this building. Anna took his hand, her fingers tiny and cold. They walked together toward the hospital cafeteria, Edward's long strides slowing to match hers. In the elevator, she looked up at him. Do billionaires eat in cafeterias? Only when they're with people who matter, he replied. She looked down and smiled, a little. Inside the cafeteria, the place was half empty. The bright lights buzzed overhead. Edward led her to the hot food counter. It was slim pickings, chicken tenders, mashed potatoes, green beans. Anna looked at the food, unimpressed. You ever had homemade mac and cheese? She asked. He nodded. I make it myself. 4 cheeses. Anna looked up at him like he'd just claimed to fly jets. You cook? I used to, not so much anymore. She wrinkled her nose. That's sad. Yeah, he said. It is. They took their trays and found a quiet table near the window. The city glowed beyond the glass, a smear of gold and blue lights against the blackness. Anna ate quietly. No complaints. No noise. Just hungry, focused chewing. Edward didn't touch his food. His mind was already racing calls to make. Favors to pull, lawyers to summon. If the hospital wouldn't act, he would find someone who would. No matter the cost, because Julia had died waiting, and Tobias wouldn't, not if Edward had anything to say about it. As they finished, Anna wiped her mouth with a napkin and asked, Will I get to see him again tonight? I'll make sure of it, Edward said. She nodded and stood up, her teddy bear under one arm, and just before they walked out, she looked at him again and said, I think Julia would have liked you. That time, he didn't hide his reaction. The pain and the hope, all wrapped up in a child who didn't cry. Edward stood in front of the hospital administrator's office like a man about to walk into battle. The polished plaque on the door read, Dr. Harold Miles, Chief Administrator. He'd been in rooms like this thousands of times where men in suits weighed risk against reward, public image against moral cost. Usually, he was the one sitting at the head of the table. Not today. Behind him, Anna sat quietly on a chair by the window, clutching her teddy bear and swinging her legs as if this were nothing more than a routine checkup. He gave a firm knock. Come in. Edward stepped inside. The office was warm and overly neat, with thick rugs, dark leather chairs, and a wall of framed diplomas that screamed prestige. Doctor, Miles looked up from behind his desk, half surprised, half curious. Mr. Blake, he said, standing. I wasn't expecting. You're about to explain to me why a 9-year-old boy is lying in your ICU without consent for life-saving treatment, Edward interrupted. His tone was calm, but the steel was unmistakable. Miles blinked, caught off guard. I understand there's a child in critical care. I assure you, our staff is doing everything they can within your legal comfort zone, Edward cut in. Miles raised his hand slightly. It's not about comfort. It's about liability. Without a legal guardian or emergency placement documentation, our hands are tied. We can administer temporary stabilization, but nothing invasive or long-term. And if he dies in the meantime, Edward asked, do you frame the death certificate with the rest of those diplomas? Miles sighed. Look, I understand your frustration, truly, but the system is the system. Edward stepped forward. The system's broken. And when a man with my kind of reach says that out loud in front of a microphone, people start listening. Now Miles stiffened. Are you threatening me? I'm promising you, Edward said. That boy could be dead in a day. His sister has no one. I'm willing to sponsor his treatment, personally, with any legal waiver you want. If liability's your concern, I'll take full responsibility. The administrator glanced at the folder on his desk. And what are your ties to the children? Edward paused. He hadn't answered that question aloud yet, not even to himself. I lost someone once, he said. To the same disease. I know what happens when people wait too long. Miles studied him for a long moment. Then, reluctantly, he said, I'll authorize a temporary emergency custody placement for the next 48 hours. It's not everything, but it'll get you in the room. That's all I need. Edward said. As he turned to leave, Miles added, "There's a social worker already assigned. Nancy Holbrook. She'll reach out. Make sure she does." Back in the hallway, Edward found Anna exactly where he'd left her. Same chair, same expression. But her fingers tapped rhythmically against the armrest now. A nervous tick. "We can see Tobias," Edward said simply. She brightened, then caught herself. "Only if he's awake. Even if he's not." They walked together back toward the ICU. As they passed the nurse's station, one of the younger nurses, maybe early 30s, blonde, with kind eyes, gave Anna a small wave. "You're the one with Tobias, right?" Anna nodded. "I put your drawing on his monitor." Anna's eyes lit up. "You did?" The nurse smiled. "It was the best thing in the whole ICU. Ugh." Edward gave her a grateful nod, and they continued. Inside the ICU, Tobias lay still. Machines beeped softly. A chest tube fluttered with each assisted breath. The child's skin looked waxy, too pale for someone his age, but he was alive. Anna climbed up into the chair beside his bed and took his hand without a word. Edward stood silently at the foot of the bed, watching the siblings, the connection between them unshakable, even in stillness. Suddenly, Anna looked up. "Mr. Blake?" "Yes? Can people lose their names?" He tilted his head. "What do you mean?" She looked at Tobias, then back at Edward. "Like, if nobody knows who you are, or takes care of you, do you just stop having a name?" Edward was quiet for a beat too long. "No," he said finally. "Names don't vanish, just because the world doesn't say them." Anna nodded slowly, like she wasn't sure if she believed him. "Sometimes it feels like we're not real unless someone remembers us." Edward pulled a chair closer. "Saturday down. When my daughter died, I kept saying her name just to hear it again," he said. "Julia. Julia. Julia. I thought if I stopped, maybe she'd vanish too." Anna looked at him. "Did she vanish?" "No," he whispered. "Not really. Because even now, you've heard her name." Anna smiled faintly. "Then maybe if I keep saying Tobias, he'll stay, too." They sat together in quiet, broken only by the soft beeping of machines. A few minutes later, the nurse returned with a blanket. "Visiting hours are ending soon." "I want to stay," Anna said. Edward looked at the nurse. "She's staying with me. I'll cover whatever's necessary." The nurse hesitated, then nodded. "I'll make arrangements." When she left, Edward looked at Anna. "I'll talk to the social worker tomorrow. We'll figure out a way to make sure Tobias gets what he needs." Anna cocked her head. "Why are you helping us?" Edward looked down at Tobias, then back at her. "Because someone should have helped Julia, and no one did." Anna took his hand. Small, warm, trusting, and Edward knew then this wasn't just charity. It wasn't guilt. It was the beginning of something he hadn't expected. Responsibility. Not to a hospital, not to a board, but to two kids with no names in the system and no place in the world. Yet, the next morning, Edward arrived at the hospital before the sun had even warmed the glass of the east-facing windows. His suit jacket was crisp, though the bags beneath his eyes betrayed a sleepless night. He had spent most of it on the phone, first with legal, then with his personal physician, and finally with a contact at the Department of Child and Family Services. Inside the pediatric ICU, Anna was curled up in a reclining chair beside Tobias's bed, her teddy bear propped protectively across her chest. She had fallen asleep holding Tobias's hand. The boy was still unconscious, but his color had improved slightly. Edward stood quietly at the door, watching her. She didn't stir. He remembered Julia sleeping like that, curled up so small, like she was afraid the bed might swallow her whole if she uncurled too much. He would tiptoe into her room after midnight just to check her breathing. He still caught himself doing that sometimes. A soft knock behind him broke the stillness. He turned. A woman stood there, mid-50s, African-American, sensible heels, gray cardigan. She carried a leather bag and a folder tucked under one arm. "Nancy Holbrook," she said. "Child Services." Edward stepped out into the hallway and gestured for her to join him in the consultation room just off the ICU. "I appreciate you coming quickly," he said once they were inside. "I was told this was urgent," she replied, setting down her bag. A child without legal guardianship in ICU usually is. Edward sat across from her. Anna and Tobias were left in the care of a neighbor, Miss Jean Davis, elderly, no formal guardianship, no power of attorney. Their mother passed away 8 months ago. No record of the father. It's a mess. Nancy nodded, already flipping open her folder. We've seen worse. He leaned forward. I want to assume temporary guardianship. Just long enough to authorize Tobias's surgery and arrange long-term care. My lawyers are drafting the forms. I'll assume full financial and legal responsibility. Nancy looked up at him with seasoned eyes. Mr. Blake, forgive the bluntness. But billionaires don't usually take in random children from hospital lobbies. I didn't find them, he said. They found me. She studied him for a long moment. You do realize that taking guardianship, even temporary, isn't just a signature and a press release. There are background checks, home evaluations. And more than that, it's emotional. These aren't PR opportunities, they're lives. I know, he said quietly, her tone softened. Why these two? He didn't hesitate. Because they reminded me of someone I lost. And because I can't live with myself if I walk away. She closed the folder, tapping her fingers on the cover. All right, let's go meet the girl. Back in the ICU, Anna was awake now, rubbing her eyes with the sleeve of her coat. She looked up as they entered. This is Miss Holbrook, Edward said gently. She's here to help. Anna looked uncertain. Are you taking us away? Nancy crouched beside her. No, sweetheart. I'm here to make sure you and Tobias are safe. That you're with someone who'll care for you the right way. Anna nodded slowly. Mr. Blake helped us. He yelled at the nurses when nobody would move. He stayed all night. Nancy smiled. He told me, I think he might be okay. Anna said. Edward raised an eyebrow. Only might? She grinned, sleepily. Nancy stood. I'll need to visit your home later today, Mr. Blake. For the placement paperwork. He nodded. You'll find it clean. Quiet. A little too big. And her school records? Already requested. Medical files? On the way. She narrowed her eyes, impressed but cautious. You don't waste time. I've wasted too much already, he said. Nancy turned to Anna. How about I take you to the cafeteria and get some breakfast while Mr. Blake talks with the doctors? Anna looked at Edward. Will you come back? Always, he said. He watched them walk down the hallway together, Anna's tiny hand tucked into Nancy's. It didn't feel like charity anymore. It felt like the beginning of a promise. In the consultation room, Edward met again with Dr. Miles and the cardiology team. The diagnosis was worse than he feared. Tobias needed a transplant. And soon, his heart was functioning at less than 20% capacity. He'd be placed on a waiting list. But due to his lack of insurance and legal status, he'd be low priority unless something changed. I'll make the calls, Edward said. Whatever connections you need, pediatric networks, donor programs, I'll fund it. Miles was wary. You understand. Even with money, matching organs takes time. Then we'd better start now. When he returned to the cafeteria, Anna was finishing a small bowl of oatmeal, talking softly to Nancy. I think he should get a dog, she said. Nancy raised an eyebrow. Mr. Blake? No, Tobias, Anna explained. When he gets better. Dogs help people feel strong. Edward smiled. I'll see what I can do. Anna looked up. Is Tobias going to be okay? The question hit him square in the chest. He knelt beside her. I don't know yet, he said truthfully, but I'm going to do everything I can. And I promise he's not alone anymore. She nodded, her expression grave. Good. 'Cause he's real bad at being alone. Nancy stood, glancing at her watch. I'll be at your house by 4. I'll be ready. As they left the hospital, Edward paused in the lobby and looked back. For the first time in a very long time, he felt something return to his chest, not pride, not power, but purpose. He didn't know where this road would lead, but he knew where it started, with a girl who didn't cry, and a boy who needed a heart, and a man who had one, finally, beating again. Edward had never been nervous walking into his own home until that afternoon. The long drive leading up to the Blake estate was lined with oaks he'd planted himself 20 years ago. Their autumn leaves crunched under the tires of the Blacktown car that brought him and Anna back from the hospital. The mansion stood at the top of the hill like a monument, all glass and stone and silence. As they pulled up, Anna leaned forward in the seat, wide-eyed. "Is this your house or a museum?" she whispered. Edward smiled slightly. "It's just a house. Too big, for one person." She didn't answer, only kept her eyes on the windows as if expecting someone famous to step out. The front door opened automatically as they approached. Inside, the marble foyer echoed their steps. Edward's assistant, Marla, was already waiting, tablet in hand. "Mr. Blake," she greeted. "The social worker arrived 20 minutes ago. She's in the sunroom." Anna clutched his hand tighter. "It's okay," he said quietly. "She just needs to see where you'll stay." They walked past the spiral staircase, through the gallery hallway of black and white photographs, most of landscapes, a few of Edward and Julia, and into the sunroom, where Nancy Holbrook sat by the window, sipping tea. She looked up and smiled. "Very well kept." Edward nodded. "Thank you." "I had the guest wing prepared for Anna and Tobias." Nancy turned to Anna. "How do you feel about staying here?" Anna looked up at Edward, then around at the space. "It's big, but too big?" Nancy pressed gently. Anna shook her head, numbered just, quiet. Nancy scribbled a note. "We'll talk about that." Woo. After the walkthrough, they gathered in Edward's study, warm wood, soft leather chairs, and a fireplace already crackling. "I have the documents here," Nancy said, opening her briefcase. "Temporary guardianship for both children. Initial term of 60 days. Renewable pending background review and home inspection." Edward took the pen and signed. His signature flowed with ease. Contracts were second nature to him, but this one felt different. This one carried weight. Anna watched him closely. "Does this mean you're our new dad?" she asked softly. Edward looked up. "Not officially. But it does mean I'm responsible for you. And I take that seriously." She nodded. "That's okay. I don't need another dad. I just need someone who won't leave." Nancy glanced between them but said nothing. When she left an hour later, the sun had dipped low in the sky, casting long amber rays across the stone floors. "Come on," Edward said, offering Anna his hand. "Let me show you your room." He led her down a quiet hallway to a guest suite, converted now with a child's bed, soft blankets, a small bookshelf, and a window seat with cushions. Anna stepped inside slowly, running her hand along the windowsill. "Is this all for me?" "Yes," Edward said. "You can put your things wherever you like." "I don't have things," she said plainly. "Just this." She held up the teddy bear. He nodded. "Then we'll get you more. But only if you pick them." "No." She sat on the edge of the bed and looked around again. "It smells like lemon." "That's Marla," he said. "She's obsessed with cleaning spray." Anna giggled a little, then went quiet. "Is it okay if I don't sleep alone?" Edward hesitated. "You want me to stay?" "No," she said. "Just, maybe leave the door open, in case Tobias wakes up and calls." "I'll leave it wide open." That night, Edward sat in his home office, phone to his ear. "No, Steve, I don't care how full the donor list is. You call every pediatric transplant coordinator in the country," he said, voice low but firm. "I'll pay for the flight, the procedure, the follow-up care, whatever it takes." He ended the call and leaned back, rubbing his eyes. He hadn't fought for anything like this in years. Not since Julia. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Anna stood in the doorway, her bear under one arm. "I couldn't sleep." He pushed the laptop aside. "Want some warm milk?" She nodded. In the kitchen, she sat at the granite island, while he heated milk on the stove, something he hadn't done since Julia was little. He handed her the mug carefully. "Did your daughter like warm milk too?" Anna asked. "She did," he said, "with a bit of honey." "This has honey," Anna said after a sip. "You remember good." He smiled. "I try." She looked up at him. "I think maybe you were meant to find us." "Why do you say that?" "Because nobody else did." Later, after tucking her back into bed and promising once more to keep the door open, Edward stood in the hallway, watching her drift to sleep. It was still new, still fragile, but something had shifted, not just in his home. In his soul, the man who had once built firewalls and data centers now found himself guarding something far more precious. 2 children who had every reason to disappear in a system that forgot names. But not this time. Not under his watch. The following morning, the house awoke in silence, as it usually did. But now, there were small footsteps padding down the hallway. The sound of cautious exploration and wonder. Edward was already awake, seated at the kitchen table with black coffee in hand and a tablet lit up in front of him, reading over Tobias's latest vitals sent by the hospital. Anna appeared at the doorway, wearing one of Marla's oversized sweatshirts that nearly reached her knees. Her braids were a little crooked from sleep, and her teddy bear was clutched under one arm as usual. "Morning," Edward said gently. "Is he okay?" she asked without preamble. Edward glanced at the screen and then back at her. "Stable. That's good for now." She slid into the chair across from him. "Stable sounds like not better. It means he's holding on," he replied. "And we're closer to getting him the surgery he needs. I've got a team working on it." "Oh, is your team like the Avengers?" she asked, eyes serious. Edward smiled. "Not quite as exciting. Mostly lawyers and doctors, but they fight in their own way." She nodded, seemingly satisfied with that answer. Marla entered quietly and set a plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of Anna, who mumbled a polite thank you before digging in. "Miss Holbrook called this morning," Marla said to Edward. "She's setting up the next steps for a long-term placement evaluation. Said she was impressed with the initial visit." Edward simply nodded, his eyes distant. He hadn't been able to shake the image of Tobias so still, so small beneath the tangle of tubes and monitors. He looked too much like Julia at the end. That thought haunted him more than he cared to admit. After breakfast, Edward offered Anna a coat. "Want to go see him?" She lit up instantly. "Can I? We'll take my car. Bring the bear." On the way to the hospital." Anna watched the city roll past with quiet intensity, noting every mural, every person on the sidewalk. "Do people get better faster if someone visits them?" she asked. "I think so," Edward said. "At least their hearts do." When they arrived at the hospital, they were greeted by Dr. Morales, the lead cardiologist on Tobias's case. She was petite, sharp-eyed, and carried herself with the kind of quiet authority that didn't ask for respect, it assumed it. "Mr. Blake." "Anna, I'm glad you came," she said. Anna clung to Edward's hand. "We've reviewed Tobias's scans again," Morales said. "And we've confirmed his condition is deteriorating faster than expected. He needs a transplant within the next 3 to 4 weeks." Edward swallowed hard. "And the list? We're advocating. Pushing him higher. Your sponsorship helps. And I've already contacted 2 hospitals across state lines. There's a possible match in Atlanta, but it's a long shot. The child's family hasn't withdrawn life support yet." Anna frowned, not fully understanding. Dr. Morales crouched to her level. "We're doing everything we can for your brother, sweetheart. He's very strong." Anna nodded. "He's always been strong. But sometimes even strong people need help." Morales smiled. "Yes, they do." They entered the ICU, and Anna took her usual spot at Tobias's side. She began talking to him softly, updating him on the eggs she had for breakfast, how big the house was, and how Mr. Blake's car had heat in the seats. Edward stood quietly at the window, arms crossed, a lump building in his throat. "Mr. Blake?" Dr. Morales said softly behind him. "Have you ever considered registering as a potential donor advocate?" He turned. "You mean legally representing Tobias during the medical process?" "Yes. It would allow you to make emergency decisions and grant access to transplant priority pathways that only recognized advocates can pursue." "I'll do it," he said without hesitation. "There's paperwork involved. I can have the hospital legal team." "No," Edward said. "Use mine. I'll have Marla send the contacts." He turned back toward the window and watched Anna lay her bear next to Tobias. She whispered something in his ear, something Edward couldn't hear but somehow understood. Hope. Pleading. Love. An hour later, they were back in the car. Anna was quiet most of the ride, but as they neared the estate, she asked, Why don't you have pictures of your daughter in the living room? Edward's hands tightened on the wheel. Julia died a long time ago, he said softly. And for a while, I couldn't look at her face. It hurt too much. Anna looked down at her lap. I think you should put them back up. He glanced at her. Why? Because people only disappear when no one talks about them. That's what you told me. His chest ached at her words. When they returned home, Edward went to the attic for the first time in years. The air was dusty. Still, in the far corner, beneath a white sheet, sat a box labeled Julia. He carried it downstairs like it was made of glass. In the study, he opened it. Inside were photos, drawings, old notebooks, a ballet slipper, and a handmade birthday card that read, "To the best dad who ever lived," in wobbly pink crayon. He sat on the floor with Anna beside him, and for the first time in a long time, he told her about Julia, how she loved dancing, how she always hummed when brushing her teeth, how she asked for pancakes shaped like animals every Saturday. Anna laughed. Tobias likes them shaped like dinosaurs. They spent the rest of the evening rearranging the mantel in the living room. Edward placed a photo of Julia front and center. She's really pretty, Anna said. You look like her. Other way around, Edward replied with a smile. That night, after Anna had gone to bed, Edward stood alone in the quiet living room, staring at his daughter's face. You'd like her, he whispered. She's got your bravery. And somewhere deep inside, something healed just a little. Enough to keep going. Enough to believe Tobias might still have a chance. The next morning broke under a pale gray sky. It had rained during the night, leaving the city soaked and glistening, like everything had been briefly washed clean. But Edward knew better. Some stains didn't rinse off with rain. He stood in his home office, dressed not in his usual tailored suit, but in a simple button-down and jeans. On his desk lay a list of hospitals, transplant networks, and a file that had just arrived from Nancy Holbrook Tobias and Anna's full child services case history. He opened the file and scanned quickly, stopping at the photo stapled to the first page. It was Tobias, younger, smiling with a chipped tooth and eyes bright with mischief. Anna sat beside him in the photo, half smiling, her hand gripping his sleeve. There were notes scrawled along the margins, words like neglect, unstable housing, maternal overdose, no legal father listed. Edward exhaled slowly. The system had failed them long before he met them. He heard footsteps in the hallway and turned just in time to see Anna peeking in. Can I come in? She asked. Always, he said, motioning her inside. She climbed onto the small couch against the wall and pulled her legs up under her. I heard you talking on the phone last night. He paused. Did I wake you? She shook her head. I couldn't sleep anyway. What did you hear? You said something about priority status and ethics committee. She bit her lip. Is Tobias running out of time? Edward sat across from her. We're working on it. It's complicated, but we're not giving up. She nodded, then asked the question that had clearly been forming in her mind all morning. Why do people like us get moved to the bottom of the list? Edward leaned back, choosing his words carefully. Because the system's not fair. It's supposed to be, but sometimes it favors people who have insurance, families, resources. Like you. A hesitated. Yes, like me. Anna looked out the window. So if Tobias had gotten sick before we met you, would he just die? Edward looked down at his hands. He might have. Her face hardened. That's not right. No, he agreed. It's not. Just then, Marla appeared at the door. Mr. Blake. Miss Holbrook is on the phone. She says it's urgent. Edward stood. Stay here, Anna. I'll be right back. He took the call in the hallway. Talk to me, Nancy, he said. There's an issue, she said without preamble. An anonymous complaint came in this morning questioning your intentions, suggesting that your guardianship of the children might be a publicity move. Edward's jaw clenched. Anonymous? They cited your past political affiliations, your business rivalries, and that viral video from the hospital lobby last week. Apparently, someone's trying to frame this as you manipulating public sympathy for personal gain. Edward rubbed his temple. Let me guess. Now the placement is under review. Technically, yes, but I've pushed back. There's going to be a formal evaluation hearing next week. I want names. It's anonymous. But my guess? Someone with reach. Possibly someone who'd benefit from your name being tied to a scandal. Or someone who doesn't want Tobias to get that transplant. There was silence on the line. Mr. Blake, Nancy said carefully. You've stirred waters that were still for a reason. But if you're serious about seeing this through, you'll need to be ready for what comes next. I've already buried one child, Nancy, he said. I won't do it again. He ended the call and stood there for a long moment. War was coming, not in the courtroom, not on the news, but in the quiet corners where influence moved faster than truth. Back in the study, Anna was flipping through a photo album she'd pulled from the bookshelf. She looked up when he returned. Was that about Tobias? Yes, he said, but it's nothing for you to worry about. You look mad. I'm not mad, he said. I'm focused. She nodded slowly. When grown-ups say that, it means they're mad at someone they can't punch. He let out a breath that was almost a laugh. Something like that. They spent the afternoon painting. Edward had discovered a small studio room he hadn't entered in years, Julia's old art space. The easel still stood in the corner, and boxes of unused supplies lined the shelves. Anna dipped her brush into blue paint and began painting the outline of a heart with wings. For Tobias, she said. Edward painted beside her, his strokes less sure, but steady. It was the first time in years he'd put brush to canvas. He wasn't painting for beauty, he was painting for peace. Afterward, as she cleaned up, Anna said, I think you're starting to smile more. He looked at her. Am I? She nodded. Your eyes don't look so lonely. That night, after she went to bed, Edward made a final call to a man named Grayson Holt, a transplant coordinator at a private clinic in Atlanta. I hear there's a heart possibly becoming available, Edward said. A match for a 9-year-old boy named Tobias. I want his name on the list, not at the bottom, at the top. You're not the legal guardian yet, Grayson replied. I have temporary custody and full financial coverage. And if that's not enough, I'll buy the damn wing of your hospital. Grayson was quiet. You're serious, he said finally. Deadly. I'll make the call, Grayson said. But you need to understand, if anyone finds out you pushed your way into this, it could blow up. People don't like the rich bending the rules. Edward stared out the window at the moon hanging low over the trees. I'm not bending the rules, he said. I'm breaking the ones that were never fair. And with that, he hung up, knowing the storm had only just begun, but he would face it, because Tobias needed more than hope now. He needed a miracle, and Edward Blake was willing to fight for it, even if it meant burning down the very system that once protected him. Edward arrived at the Department of Child and Family Services 10 minutes early, dressed not in a power suit, but in a simple navy blazer and a wool sweater that made him look more like a professor than a billionaire. He knew exactly how this worked: appear too polished, and they'd call him calculated. Appear too casual, and they'd call him indifferent. Appear real, and maybe, just maybe, they'd listen. The hearing was scheduled in a modest conference room on the second floor. Fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, and the walls were decorated with children's drawings and procedural charts taped in haphazard fashion. A long rectangular table took up most of the space, with 10 chairs arranged around it. At the far end of the table sat Nancy Holbrook, her folder already open and her pen poised. Across from her, 3 evaluators from the department, a middle-aged woman with sharp glasses, a man with salt and pepper hair and a clipboard, and a younger woman typing silently on a laptop. Edward took the seat closest to Nancy. Thank you for being here, Mr. Blake, said the woman with glasses. This hearing is to address the complaint submitted regarding your temporary guardianship of Anna and Tobias King. While the source is anonymous, the claims have been deemed credible enough to require formal review. Edward nodded once, keeping his face calm. I understand. The concern, the older man added, is that your intentions may be influenced by media attention, corporate interests, or personal guilt, rather than the long-term welfare of the children. Edward glanced at Nancy. She gave him the smallest of nods, permission to speak freely. I'm aware of how this looks, Edward began. A billionaire takes in 2 orphaned kids, one of whom is critically ill, and suddenly a video of him shouting at a hospital team goes viral. But I didn't do this for the cameras. I didn't even know someone was filming. I did it because no one else was. And your relationship with the children before the incident? the younger evaluator asked, eyes never leaving her screen. I didn't know them, he said plainly. Not until Anna grabbed my hand in that lobby and asked me to save her brother. A pause hung in the room like a held breath. I could have walked away, Edward continued, and they would have become 2 more names buried in a system too overwhelmed to notice. But I didn't walk away, and I won't. The woman with glasses scribbled something in her notebook. The man asked, do you believe you can provide a stable environment for them? Yes. Financially, emotionally, and legally. But more importantly, I can give them what they've never had. Someone who shows up. At that moment, the door opened and Anna stepped in, escorted by Marla. Edward had requested that Anna be allowed to speak, if she wanted to. She wore a simple dress and her sneakers. Her hair was neatly braided, and she held her teddy bear tight to her chest. The room softened the moment she entered. The woman with glasses addressed her gently. Anna, sweetheart, do you want to say something today? Anna looked to Edward, who gave her a supportive smile. She walked up to the table and stood beside him. Mr. Blake didn't have to help us, she said, voice clear but small. But he did. And not just at the hospital. He stays with me at night when I get scared. He made space in his house for my drawings. He tells me about his daughter who went to heaven. Just like our mom. She looked around the room. I don't know about lawyers and papers, but I know he makes me feel safe. That's all I ever wanted. There was silence after she finished. The evaluators avoided each other's eyes for a beat. Then the younger woman nodded and resumed typing. Nancy stood to present a stack of updated evaluations, school enrollment for Anna, medical sponsorship documents for Tobias, and a background check that came back pristine. She spoke firmly, clearly, outlining every action Edward had taken in less than 2 weeks. Setting up trust funds, hiring trauma, informed therapists, and even offering to fund a new wing for the children's ward where Tobias was being treated. It's not just about resources, she concluded. It's about intention. And I've never seen a private citizen move faster or more earnestly than Mr. Blake. The panel dismissed them after that, saying they would deliberate and notify them within 48 hours. Edward led Anna out of the building, his hand gently on her shoulder. Did I do okay? She asked as they stepped into the cold air. You did perfect, he said. You were brave. I just told the truth. That's the bravest thing a person can do, he said quietly. They returned home to a surprise waiting on the front porch. A medium-sized box wrapped in simple brown paper. Taped to the top was a note in crayon. For Tobias, from Ava, room 302. Inside was a handmade quilt, covered in patches of stars and clouds, and a small toy dinosaur tucked in the corner. Anna gasped, he's going to love this. They drove straight to the hospital. Tobias was still unconscious, but his heart monitor showed more stable readings. Anna carefully placed the quilt over him and tucked the dinosaur next to his side. You got fans now, she whispered to him. You're famous. Edward stepped out into the hallway to take a call. It was Grayson Holt from the Atlanta clinic. I have news, Grayson said. The donor child passed this morning. The parents agreed to donate. Blood type matches Tobias. It's not perfect, but it's close enough. If you move fast, Edward's heart pounded. How soon? Tonight. But the hospital board is pushing back. They don't like how public this has become. Edward's voice dropped an octave. I don't care what they like. Get me the papers. I'll sign whatever's necessary. And the surgeon? Edward paused. I'll fly him myself if I have to. Grayson exhaled. Okay, I'll make it happen. But Edward, if this goes south, it'll be your name in the headlines. I'm not worried about headlines, Edward said. I'm worried about a little boy who hasn't had a fair shot since the day he was born. He ended the call and turned to look through the ICU glass at Tobias, so still, yet surrounded by the warmth of people who finally saw him. The hearing was over. The battle was not. But tonight might be the first real chance to win. The sky had darkened into a steel-gray canopy by the time Edward returned to the hospital. A storm was brewing outside, wind whistling low between the buildings, like nature itself was holding its breath. He strode through the automatic doors of the pediatric wing, the weight of urgency hanging heavy in every step. Inside Tobias's room, The machines beeped their slow, steady rhythm. The new quilt lay neatly over the boy's frail body, and the small dinosaur plush sat guard at his side. Anna sat cross-legged in the chair, whispering a story to her brother. She looked up as Edward entered. "Did they find a heart?" she asked immediately. Edward crouched beside her, meeting her eyes. "Yes, a donor match came through." Anna's mouth parted slightly. She blinked once, then clutched her bear tighter. "So, he can get better? We're going to do everything we can," Edward said. "But it has to happen tonight." Anna looked at her brother, then back to Edward. "Promise me." He nodded. "I promise." He stood and stepped into the hallway, where Dr. Morales was waiting with her arms crossed and a tight expression. "You know we're on borrowed time," she said. "I spoke with Grayson. The heart is viable. What's the issue now?" Morales glanced down the hall. "Politics. The hospital board isn't happy about you jumping the line. There are concerns that the process is being manipulated, too much press, too many questions." "Concerns?" Edward's voice sharpened. "You're telling me someone would let a child die over image control?" She sighed. "This isn't just about Tobias. It's about precedent. If we allow this under pressure, others will come knocking." "I'm not others," Edward's voice dropped, colder now. "And this isn't about precedent. This is about a 9-year-old boy who never had a chance until now. You have a match. You have a surgeon. You have consent. So tell me what exactly is stopping us." Just then, Grayson Holt arrived, slightly breathless, carrying a leather folder and an iPad. The donor family signed the release. "Transport team is airborne. ETA, 2 hours. The heart is en route. Then we prep for surgery," Edward said. Morales hesitated, then nodded. "I'll get the ore ready." As she walked off, Grayson pulled Edward aside. "There's pushback. A few board members are threatening to delay authorization unless they speak with you first." Edward narrowed his eyes. "Who?" Grayson glanced toward the end of the hall. "Eldon Vickers. He's here in person. Claims you're abusing influence. Says this whole situation reeks of PR manipulation." Edward exhaled slowly. "Then let's give him something real to smell." They found Vickers in a private lounge down the hall, sipping black coffee and scrolling his phone with disinterest. He looked up, unsurprised. "Mr. Blake," he said, offering no hand. "I hear you're trying to rewrite protocol." "I'm trying to save a child," Edward replied coolly. "Is that not part of your hospital mission?" "This hospital," Vickers said slowly, "does not answer to headlines or emotional coercion." "Good," Edward said. "Then answer to this." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "The heart is arriving tonight. Tobias is prepped. If you block this surgery because of optics, I'll make sure every media outlet in the country knows your name. I'll fund a full investigation into how many children were lost on your watch because red tape mattered more than survival." "You'd threaten the board?" "I'm not threatening," Edward said. "I'm promising." Vickers set down his coffee. "You think money gives you the moral high ground?" "No," Edward said. "But it gives me a megaphone. And I'll use it until the right people listen." The silence stretched. Finally, Vickers stood, adjusted his blazer, and said, "Do what you want. But know this, if anything goes wrong, you'll be the one held responsible." "I already am," Edward said without blinking. "I chose to be." Back in the ICU, preparations were already underway. Nurses moved quickly, checking vitals and drawing labs. The pediatric surgeon, Dr. Liao, arrived moments later, reviewing Tobias's chart with swift efficiency. Anna watched everything quietly from the corner. Edward approached her and knelt again. "He's going into surgery soon." Anna didn't speak right away. She looked at her brother, then back at Edward. "Will he be different after?" she asked. "Like, will he still be Tobias?" Edward hesitated, then smiled softly. "He might need some time. But yes, he'll still be your brother, just with a stronger heart." Anna looked at him. "Can you stay with him?" "Well, I can't. I won't leave his side." As the surgical team wheeled Tobias away, Anna followed behind until they reached the double doors leading to the operating theater. She pressed her small hand against the glass, watching until her brother disappeared around the corner. Then she turned and walked straight into Edward's arms. He held her tight. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. Inside, time stretched. Hours passed. Edward sat in the surgical waiting area, alone now. His phone buzzed with updates, emails, more noise from his legal team and PR handlers. He ignored it all. His world had narrowed to the hands of one surgeon and the strength of one little boy. At 2:14 a.m., Dr. Liao entered the room, mask pulled down, eyes tired but alert. Edward stood immediately. "Well, the transplant was successful," she said. "Tobias's vitals are strong. No signs of rejection so far. He's in recovery now, but stable." Edward exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. "Thank you," he said, voice cracking. "He'll need monitoring, of course," she added. "And immunosuppressants. But right now, things look promising." Edward nodded. Later, when Anna was allowed to see her brother again, she stood beside the hospital bed, clutching his hand. "You did it," she whispered. "You fought." Edward watched from the doorway. He didn't step in. He didn't need to. This wasn't his moment. It was theirs. And in the quiet hum of recovery monitors, in the rhythmic beeping of a new, beating heart, Edward Blake realized he hadn't just saved a life. He had found one again. Morning sunlight poured through the high windows of the recovery room, soft and golden, catching the edges of the freshly cleaned floor and casting faint reflections across the machines that surrounded Tobias's bed. He lay motionless, his face still pale but no longer ghost-like, a slow, steady rhythm blinking on the heart monitor above him. Anna sat curled in the armchair, her teddy bear on her lap, watching him like a sentry. Her eyes were tired but hopeful bright, with a new kind of light that hadn't existed just days earlier. Edward stood nearby, sipping lukewarm coffee, exhaustion creasing the corners of his eyes. He hadn't changed clothes since the night before, and it showed, but there was something alive in his posture, a quiet readiness to bear the weight of this fragile hope. "He's breathing easier," Anna whispered. Edward nodded. "His new heart's strong. That's a good sign. Do you think he can hear us?" "I think he never stopped." She looked up at him. "I want to be here when he wakes up." "You will," Edward promised. Dr. Morales entered, flipping through Tobias's chart. Her eyes flicked over the readouts, and her posture eased visibly. "The graft is holding. No signs of infection. His vitals are holding better than we expected. He's not out of the woods, but he's walking toward the edge." Edward allowed himself a small smile. "I've arranged for him to stay in the private recovery suite for now," Morales continued. "Limited visitors, less noise." The board didn't like it, but I told them I'd resign if they didn't back off. Edward raised a brow. "You threatened to resign?" Morales gave a dry smile. "Let's call it a confident suggestion." Later that day, Edward and Anna returned home to rest. The house felt different now, not just quieter, but fuller somehow, as if Tobias's presence lingered between the walls even while his body remained in recovery. Edward moved through the halls like a man returning from war battle-worn, changed, but standing. He sat down at the grand piano in the front room, one he hadn't touched in years. Slowly, tentatively, he pressed a single key, then another. The sound filled the house uneven, rusty, but undeniably alive. Anna appeared in the doorway, holding a piece of paper in one hand and a pair of scissors in the other. "Can we make a welcome home sign?" she asked. He turned toward her, his hands still resting on the keys. "I think that's a great idea." Together, they gathered supplies. Construction paper, markers, glitter glue leftovers from an old storage closet Marla had unearthed. Edward had never written anything in glitter before. It took 3 tries to spell Tobias without smudging the I. Anna giggled every time he made a mistake. They hung the sign above the fireplace, lopsided but perfect. That evening, while Anna dozed off on the couch wrapped in a soft blanket, Edward sat in the study going through his emails. Most were from well-wishers. A few from reporters, one from an old rival, congratulating him with unsettling friendliness. But one message stood out. Subject: urgent inquiry, guardianship challenge filed. From Martin Hale, Legal Counsel, Family Advocacy Group. Edward opened it and read, his eyes narrowing with each line. A formal challenge had been submitted to the court, questioning his right to retain custody of Anna and Tobias. The claim, that Edward had acted unethically by leveraging his wealth and influence to expedite Tobias's transplant, thereby bypassing children who had waited longer. There was more. The challenger was not anonymous this time. A woman named Charlene Parks, Tobias and Anna's estranged aunt. Edward leaned back in his chair. He remembered the name from the files. Charlene had been estranged from their mother for nearly a decade. Had refused guardianship twice before. No financial stability. No prior interest. But now that the media had picked up the story, now that Edward Blake's name was synonymous with miracle, she wanted in. He forwarded the email to Nancy Holbrook and followed up with a call. She's challenging on what grounds? Nancy asked, already irritated. Alleged abuse of system protocol, Edward replied. And blood relation, Nancy exhaled sharply. The judge might entertain it, especially if she's appearing as next of kin. She's doing this for publicity, Edward said, or worse, for compensation. Probably both, but we'll handle it. We'll file a counter motion. You've done everything by the book, Edward. You've provided shelter, education, medical advocacy. And most of all, you've shown up. That matters. Will it matter to a judge? He asked. Nancy didn't answer right away. We'll make sure it does. The following morning, Edward drove Anna to the hospital alone. She was unusually quiet in the back seat. Something wrong? He asked gently. I had a dream, she said. That someone came and took Tobias away. That I couldn't stop them. Edward's hands tightened on the steering wheel. No one's taking your brother, he said. Not while I'm breathing. She nodded, but the tension in her small shoulders didn't ease. At the hospital, Tobias stirred for the first time. His eyes fluttered open slowly, blinking against the light. Anna was there immediately, her hand in his. Toby? She whispered. He looked at her, unfocused but alive. Bear, he murmured weakly. Where's Bear? She pressed the teddy bear into his arms, tears rolling down her cheeks. Right here. Always right here. Edward stood at the foot of the bed, silent, humbled by the simple miracle of breath returning to a child who had been so close to gone. For a brief moment, all the threats faded. It was just life fragile, sacred, beginning again. But as he left the hospital room that afternoon and stepped out into the corridor, his phone buzzed again. Cour d'assiette, custody hearing, 2 weeks. Edward stared at the screen, jaw clenched. The war wasn't over. It had only changed battlegrounds. But this time, he wasn't just fighting to save a life. He was fighting to keep it. 2 weeks was not much time to prepare for a custody battle, but Edward had never been one to let a ticking clock dictate the outcome of a war. The moment the court date was confirmed, his house transformed into a command center. Legal documents sprawled across his study table. Marla coordinated logistics. Nancy Holbrook had moved her laptop into the dining room and worked there from sunrise to late evening, her coffee never far from reach. Edward barely slept. The thought of losing Anna and Tobias now after everything lit a fire in him deeper than any corporate takeover ever had. The media had caught wind of the challenge. Headlines swirled. Billionaire's guardianship under threat. Blood versus bonds. The fight for 2 orphans. And the more insidious, is Edward Blake playing hero or puppet master? News vans began lurking outside the gates. Anonymous online forums filled with speculation. Some accused him of manipulating the narrative for attention. Others defended him, citing Tobias's miraculous recovery. But none of them knew the truth, the long, sleepless nights, Anna's quiet fear, Tobias's weakening grip on life until that very heart arrived. I should talk to the press, Edward said one night as he stood by the fireplace, staring at the flames like they held answers. Nancy shook her head from the sofa behind him. Let them speculate. If you respond, it becomes a show. Keep it in the courtroom, where facts still matter. Facts don't win hearts, he said. No, she agreed, but they win judges. Anna entered the room, dragging her blanket behind her, rubbing her eyes. I can't sleep, she whispered. Edward knelt and opened his arms. She walked into them without hesitation. I'm scared, she said. I know. he replied, wrapping her tight. But I won't let anyone take you. Not ever. You promise? With everything I am. The next morning, the doorbell rang. Marla answered. But the voice that followed made Edward freeze in the kitchen. Charlene Parks to see Mr. Blake. He walked to the foyer, jaw tight. She stood there mid-50s, stylish in a muted leopard print coat and gold earrings. Her hair was done too neatly for a casual visit, and her smile was thin and cold. You have a lot of nerve coming here, Edward said. I came to talk, she replied, stepping inside uninvited. Woman to man, you're not family to those kids. You had a chance, twice. You declined both times. That was before all the cameras and headlines, Edward shot back. Charlene narrowed her eyes. You think I want them for fame? Honey, I've got grandkids older than that girl. I'm not here for show. I'm here because they're blood. Blood didn't save Tobias's life. That's not fair. Neither is swooping in after someone else did the hard work, Edward said. You think signing a paper makes you a parent? Try holding a dying child's hand and telling them not to let go. Charlene's expression hardened. You think money can make up for what they lost? No, Edward said, but love can, and I've given them that every single day since I met them. She crossed her arms. We'll let the court decide. He stepped closer. They won't just decide who has a legal right. They'll decide who earned it. Charlene left in silence, but her presence lingered like the aftertaste of something sour. Later that day, Nancy reviewed the psychological evaluations with Edward. The court appointed a neutral child therapist to observe Anna. She said, We'll receive the report next week, just in time for the hearing. It's critical. She's going to ask Anna who she wants to live with, isn't she? He asked. Most likely. He sighed. That's a terrible position to put a child in. Nancy nodded. It is, but it could be what saves your case. Meanwhile, Anna had started painting again. Edward had set up a space in the sunroom with canvases and paintbrushes, and each afternoon she'd lose herself in colors. One evening, Edward walked in to find her finishing a large painting. It was a portrait of their family, not blood, but bond. Tobias lying in bed, holding the bear. Anna beside him, smiling, and Edward behind them both, arms outstretched like a guardian angel. He couldn't speak. I'll bring this to court, she said simply, so they know. The night before the hearing, a storm rolled in. Thunder cracked across the sky, and rain lashed against the windows. Edward stood by the window of his study, staring into the dark. Why now? He asked aloud. Why? When we just started healing, Marla came in with a cup of tea. Because when people see light, they always try to claim it. He looked at her. Do you think I'll lose? She shook her head. Not if that judge has a heart. In the guest room, Anna had crawled into bed with Tobias, who was now strong enough to stay at home under 24-hour medical supervision. She whispered stories to him, just like she had in the ICU. And he drifted to sleep with a smile. The following morning, the courthouse loomed tall and gray beneath the clouds. Edward wore a simple navy suit, the same one from the hospital hearing. Anna walked beside him, holding his hand tightly. Nancy met them on the steps, binder in hand, hair pulled back with militant precision. You ready? She asked. Edward looked down at Anna, then back at Nancy. I've never been readier. Oh. They stepped inside. Across the hall, Charlene stood with her attorney. She didn't look smug anymore, just calculating. The courtroom was smaller than Edward expected. A single judge sat at the front, flanked by flags. A court reporter typed briskly. A few spectators lingered in the gallery. As the session opened, the judge called both parties forward. Charlene's lawyer spoke first, citing kinship rights, history of guardianship preference for blood relatives, and concerns about Edward's lifestyle and media coverage. He painted Edward as disconnected, privileged, emotionally compensating for personal losses. When Nancy rose, her voice cut through like glass. Mr. Blake is not a replacement. He is a rescue. These children were failed by every other adult in their lives except him. She presented photos, transcripts, school reports. She cited Edward's full-time support, the private care for Tobias, and Anna's steady academic improvement. Then she played a recording. Anna's voice filled the courtroom. He stayed. He never left. Even when I cried at night. Even when my brother almost died. He stayed. I love him. Silence fell like a gavel. The judge closed the session and promised a decision within 72 hours. Outside, the clouds had parted slightly. A sliver of light broke through. Anna stood on the courthouse steps, hand in Edward's, and said, "We already won." He looked down. "How so?" "Because I'm not scared anymore." And for the first time in weeks, Edward allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, hope had finally taken root. The next 72 hours moved like syrup. Every minute crawled. Every hour hung in the air like a verdict waiting to fall. Edward tried to keep the house quiet and calm, but beneath the surface, everything was taut with anticipation. Even Marla, usually a fortress of composure, seemed restless cleaning the same counter 3 times, forgetting her tea on the burner. Anna picked up on it too. She didn't ask about the hearing, but she stopped painting, stopped reading aloud to Tobias, and started following Edward more closely, watching his face, as if it held a secret. Tobias, still recovering but alert, asked Edward on the second night, "Did I do something wrong?" Edward blinked. "Why would you think that?" "Because everyone's so quiet." Edward knelt beside his bed. "No, buddy. You didn't do anything wrong. We're just waiting on a grown-up decision. One that has nothing to do with you being good or bad." Tobias's lip trembled. "I don't want to go somewhere else. I like it here. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you stay," Edward said, placing a hand gently over Tobias's. "No matter what." That night, Anna crept into Edward's room. "I can't sleep," she said, standing in the doorway with her blanket draped over her shoulders like a cape. Edward patted the chair beside the bed. She climbed in and sat cross-legged, silent for a while. "Do you think the judge liked my painting?" she asked. "I think the judge saw more than a painting. I think he saw the truth." Anna nodded, chewing on her lip. "And if he doesn't?" Edward exhaled. "Then we find another way. But no matter what, I won't leave you. That's a promise I'll never break." She leaned against his arm and whispered, "You're the first promise someone's kept." At precisely 9:17 a.m. on the third day, Nancy Holbrook called. Edward picked up before the first ring ended. "The ruling just came through," she said, voice clipped with emotion. He braced himself. "You've been granted full legal guardianship of both children. Permanent custody." For a second, he didn't respond. The world went still. Then, "Say that again?" "You won," Nancy said, her voice softening. "Congratulations, Edward. It's over. You brought them home, and now the law sees what they already knew. You are their family." He closed his eyes and let out a shaky breath. "Thank you, Nancy." "Don't thank me," she said. "You earned this." He turned from the window, where the morning sun poured across the floor, and walked straight to the kitchen where Anna and Tobias were finishing breakfast. Anna looked up, eyes wide with question. Edward knelt, pulled her into his arms, and whispered, "You're staying. You're mine, forever." She didn't say anything, just clung to him with such fierce relief that tears welled in his eyes. Tobias, slower to understand, asked from the table, "We're not leaving?" Edward reached out and pulled him in too. "You're home, son. You're staying home." Later that afternoon, after the news had sunk in like honey into warm bread, Edward sat outside on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the kids play in the backyard. Tobias moved more cautiously than his sister, still under doctor's orders not to overexert himself, but he smiled freely now, and his laughter, light and full, was the best sound Edward had heard in years. Marla stepped outside and handed him the mail. One letter stood out. No return address. Elegant envelope. Heavyweight paper. Edward opened it slowly. Inside was a note, handwritten. "Some people fight battles with swords, others with silence. You fought with love, and you won. Keep going. The world needs more men like you. Julia's teacher, Miss Carmichael." Edward hadn't seen her since Julia's funeral. She must have read the news. He folded the note and placed it in his pocket, heart swelling with something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time: pride. Later that evening, he tucked Anna and Tobias into bed, something that had become a sacred routine. Anna insisted on telling Tobias a story, and tonight it was about a girl and her brother who went on an adventure through a magic forest where the trees whispered secrets and the rivers sang lullabies. Edward sat on the edge of the bed, just listening. After Anna drifted off, he stayed for a moment, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead, then Tobias's. In the quiet, Tobias mumbled. "You're like a dad now," Edward whispered back. "I've always wanted to be." Then he stood, turned off the lamp, and stepped into the hallway where Marla waited. "They'll be okay," she said. He nodded. "And so will I." That night, Edward walked through every room in the house. He paused in the study, now filled with drawings and toy dinosaurs. In the kitchen, he saw the glitter-covered sign Anna had made, still taped to the fridge. When he reached the piano, he sat and played not somber notes, but a gentle, hopeful melody. Something new. Something growing. The next morning, he woke up before dawn and wrote 2 emails. One was to the foundation board, requesting approval for a new pediatric heart program in Tobias's name. The other was to his executive assistant, informing her he'd be working part-time for the foreseeable future. There were more important things now. Edward Blake was no longer the man he had been when Anna first grabbed his hand in that hospital lobby. He was something stronger, something softer. He was a father, and in the life of 2 children who once had nothing, that meant everything. The days that followed were the calmest Edward had known in years. The house, once so large and silent, now pulsed with daily rhythms, Anna's laughter floating through the halls, Tobias's careful steps growing steadier, the smell of pancakes on Saturdays, Marla humming old Motown classics while folding laundry. It was a new kind of wealth, one that had nothing to do with numbers and everything to do with presence. One crisp morning in early spring, Edward stood at the edge of the driveway, sipping coffee as Anna and Tobias waited for the school bus. Tobias, still under close medical watch, was attending just a few hours each day, escorted by a nurse. But even that small step meant everything to him. Anna skipped down the front steps, backpack bouncing. "Daddy, do you think I can bring my teddy for show and tell?" she asked brightly. He blinked at the word daddy and felt a quiet jolt in his chest. She'd never used it before, not once. She hadn't even said it deliberately. It had just happened. "Of course," he said, his voice warm but steady. "I think Teddy would love that." She beamed and hugged him tight, then ran to catch the bus. Tobias gave him a wave through the window as it pulled away, and Edward watched until the taillights disappeared around the corner. Back inside, he found Marla clearing the breakfast table. "They're settling in," she said. "They're healing," he replied. She looked at him for a moment. "So are you." He didn't answer, but he didn't need to. Healing didn't always come with fireworks. It often arrived in quiet mornings like this. Later that day, Edward attended a board meeting for the Blake Foundation. It was the first time he'd set foot in a corporate setting since the custody hearing. The conference room buzzed with tension. His absence had stirred unease among the suits, and they were eager to know if he planned to return full-time. "We need your direction on the Q3 initiatives," one member said, tapping a pen against his tablet. "And there's pressure from the press about your priorities," another added. "Some are questioning whether your personal involvement in the children's hospital compromises your objectivity." Edward held up a hand, calm but firm. "Let me be clear. My priorities haven't changed, they've clarified. I'm still committed to this foundation, but I'm also committed to using our resources where they matter most. The pediatric heart program we're launching in Tobias's name is non-negotiable." A few faces tensed. "If that's a conflict for any of you," he continued, "you're welcome to resign." Silence followed. No one moved. Meeting adjourned, Edward walked through the hallways of the tower that bore his name and felt for the first time that it meant something. Not just power, but purpose. That evening, he received an invitation in the mail, printed on thick cardstock with embossed gold lettering. Community Heroes Award Ceremony, honoring Edward Blake for service and impact, hosted by the City of Brookwood and Brookwood Medical Center. Date, the 14th of April, 6 p.m. Vertical Bar Venue, Brookwood Civic Theater. He stared at it for a long moment. When Anna saw it on the counter, she lit up. "You're getting an award?" "I guess so." "Are we going?" He hesitated. "Would you want to?" She nodded. "Only if I can wear my sparkly dress." Edward chuckled. "Deal." On the night of the event, Anna wore the sparkly blue dress they'd picked out together. Tobias, still not strong enough for crowds, stayed home with Marla. But not before handing Edward a folded piece of paper. "For when they talk about you," he said shyly. Inside was a drawing of Edward with a big red heart on his chest, holding Anna and Tobias's hands. Underneath, in crooked letters, "He doesn't wear a cape, but he saved us." At the theater, the audience rose in applause as Edward stepped onto the stage. The mayor handed him a small plaque and gestured for him to speak. He approached the microphone, holding the drawing behind the award, and paused. "I don't usually give speeches," he said. "I spent most of my life thinking success was measured in contracts and buildings and bottom lines. But a few months ago, I walked into a hospital lobby, and a little girl grabbed my hand and asked me to save her brother." "Huh." The room fell utterly silent. "I had no idea what I was doing," he continued. "But I said yes. Not because I'm brave. Because I couldn't walk away." He unfolded Tobias's drawing and held it up. "This is what matters. Not this plaque, not my name on a building, but the hands you choose to hold when it counts." Applause erupted, genuine, emotional, long. Backstage after the ceremony, Edward crouched down and asked Anna, "How'd I do?" She gave a solemn nod. "Good, but next time say the part about Teddy too." He laughed. "Duly noted." As they stepped outside into the night, cameras flashing in the distance, Edward shielded Anna gently from the crowd. Reporters called out questions about the award, the hospital, the custody battle, but he said nothing. Instead, he whispered to Anna, "Ready to go home?" She slipped her hand into his. Driving home through the quiet streets, Edward glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Anna fast asleep, her head resting against the car seat, one hand still clutching her teddy bear. And for the first time in a very long time, he realized that he wasn't running from anything anymore. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. Spring bloomed in Brookwood with a quiet grace. The cherry trees lining the neighborhood sidewalks burst into soft pink, and the air carried a gentler kind of warmth. At the Blake residence, life found a rhythm that felt as close to peace as Edward had ever known. Each morning, Tobias, though still limited in physical activity, insisted on helping Marla set the table for breakfast. His tiny victories, walking an extra step, tying his shoelaces with trembling hands, were celebrated like Olympic feats. Anna, meanwhile, had blossomed into a confident, witty girl who no longer flinched at doorbells or asked if Edward would come back when he left the room. But beneath that surface of calm, a strange ripple began to form. It started with a letter. Marla brought it in with the day's mail, a plain envelope with no return address, addressed simply to Mr. Edward Blake. Edward opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed in bold font. "You think you saved them, but some things don't stay buried." There was no signature, no clue, just the unnerving chill of threat cloaked in ambiguity. Edward read it 3 times, then folded it and placed it in his desk drawer. He said nothing to Anna, nothing to Tobias. And when Marla asked, "Something wrong?" he simply said, "Junk mail." But that night, he checked every window twice before bed. The next day, he met Nancy Holbrook for lunch at a quiet bistro near City Hall. As they sipped coffee, he slid the letter across the table. Nancy read it, then looked up sharply. "You didn't show this to the police?" "I don't want to panic the kids. This could be a crank, a troll with too much time, or someone digging where they shouldn't," Edward said. "I need to know who." Nancy tucked the letter into her briefcase. "I'll have our private investigator look into it. Meanwhile, you keep things normal. Don't let the kids see a single crack." Later that week, Edward received a call from Dr. Morales. "I know this is strange," she said, "but I think you should come down to the hospital." "Is it Tobias?" Edward asked, already reaching for his keys. "Number, he's fine." But we had a man show up at the front desk, asking questions. Said he was with child welfare. But we couldn't verify his credentials. Edward froze. "What kind of questions?" "He wanted access to Tobias's medical file, and he kept pressing about your role in the transplant process." Edward's voice tightened. "Did you give him anything?" "Of course not. I asked him to leave. Security escorted him out. But I thought you should know." That night, Edward reviewed the footage from his home security system. Nothing unusual. No signs of a break-in. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that the stillness around him was more like silence before a storm. Then, 2 days later, another letter arrived. This time, the message was hand-scrawled. "You bought a miracle. Now pay the price." It came with a photo. Edward's heart stopped. It was Anna, snapped from behind as she played at the school playground. The angle was distant, the shot grainy but unmistakably her. Someone had been close enough to see her, to photograph her, and mail it without being seen. He called Nancy immediately. "We're filing for a protective order," she said, "and I'm pulling every favor I've ever earned to find out who's behind this. I want security detail on both kids. Discreet, but constant." "Already in motion," she said. "You okay?" Edward paused. "I've handled hostile takeovers, corporate sabotage, threats, but this is different. This is my family." The next morning, Edward kept Anna home from school. Tobias, still recovering, was already under Marla's close watch. But Edward took no chances. He brought in a private security consultant, James Penner, a former FBI agent with a quiet, steel-edged demeanor. Penner walked the perimeter of the estate, checked every entry point, studied the letters, and listened carefully as Edward explained the situation. "You think this is about the custody case?" Penner asked. Edward shook his head. "Number Charlene's out of the picture. She didn't have this kind of reach. Then who would want to scare you?" Edward stared out the window. "Anyone I beat. Anyone who thinks I don't deserve what I've built. Or someone who thinks I cheated the system." Penner nodded slowly. "We'll trace the postmarks. We'll sweep the house for bugs. But you need to be ready for this to escalate." Edward didn't flinch. "I already am." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees and the shadows stretched longer across the yard, Anna crawled into Edward's lap with her favorite book. "Read to me?" she asked. He wrapped an arm around her and opened the book, voice steady despite the storm inside him. Every word he read felt like defiance, proof that no threat could steal the life he was building. As he turned the last page and Anna dozed off beside him, Edward whispered into the quiet, "Whoever you are, you won't win." Outside, the wind stirred through the trees, and somewhere not far away, a camera clicked. The next morning began with a familiar stillness, the kind that pretended nothing was wrong. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the breakfast nook. The smell of cinnamon toast filled the kitchen. Anna hummed while drawing rainbows on the back of an old grocery list. Tobias sat across from her, flipping through a comic book, his energy gradually returning day by day. But Edward was no longer fooled by peace. He sat at the kitchen island, staring into his untouched coffee, reading the same sentence in a morning briefing 3 times before giving up. Across from him, Marla watched him quietly, wiping down the already clean counter. "You haven't told them, have you?" she asked softly. "No," Edward said, "and I won't, not unless I have to." Marla hesitated, then said, "They're stronger than you think." "I know they are," he replied, "but that doesn't mean they need to carry this." "No." Just then, Penner walked in from the back patio. He was dressed in plain clothes, but everything about him screamed vigilance, eyes scanning, back always to a wall, posture tight like a coiled spring. "We need to talk," Penner said. Edward followed him into the study. Penner closed the door behind them. "Found something," Penner began, sliding a tablet across the desk. "Security footage from the neighborhood 2 nights ago. A car parked 3 blocks away, dark-colored van, no plates, Saturday there for 47 minutes. Lights off, no movement." Edward frowned. "That's close. Closer than I like, and it gets worse." Penner tapped the tablet again. "Our investigator matched the handwriting from the second letter to an old case, one involving a man named Richard Clemens, former surgical technician, fired for falsifying donor logs. 2 years ago, he tried to file a whistleblower complaint claiming the transplant system was corrupt, but he was discredited." Edward's heart slowed. "You think he believes I paid to jump the donor list?" Penner nodded. "Looks that way. He disappeared after that, burned a lot of bridges. But it seems he's resurfacing. And he's fixated on your case." "Why now?" Edward asked. Why not months ago during the custody battle? Penner sat forward. Because now you're a symbol. The miracle billionaire father. He doesn't want justice, he wants to dismantle the story, and the best way to do that is to shake the public's faith. Edward was quiet for a long moment. What's our next move? We set a trap, Penner said. We make you visible, public. Give him the illusion of vulnerability while we control every angle. Edward looked out the window, where Anna and Tobias were now playing catch with Marla under the morning sun. And if he tries something, we'll be ready. That afternoon, Edward agreed to a public appearance at the hospital where Tobias had undergone his transplant. It was billed as a community thank you event. Doctors, nurses, donors, patients, and families gathering in the hospital garden for a celebration of life. The media was invited. So was the mayor. It was the kind of scene that invited attention, and that's exactly what Edward needed. He brought Anna and Tobias, though both were kept under close watch by Penner's team. Anna wore her favorite sunflower dress and twirled in the grass while Tobias clung to Edward's hand, still a bit shy in large crowds. The speeches began just after noon. Edward was last to speak. He stepped onto the small platform with a steady gaze, holding no notes. There's no manual for becoming a parent, he said. Especially not overnight. Especially not in a hospital hallway, with a little girl tugging your hand and asking you to save her brother. Oh. Murmurs of recognition rippled through the crowd. I didn't know what I was doing. He continued. I just knew I couldn't walk away. And maybe that's all any of us can do. Show up, stay, and love with everything we have. Applause followed. Genuine, heartfelt. Then it happened. In the back of the crowd, a man in a gray jacket raised his phone not to record, but to scan. His eyes flicked toward Edward, then away. He moved too smoothly, too deliberately. One of Penner's men noticed, then another. Penner, stationed near the side stage, nodded to his team. Within seconds, they closed in. The man turned, trying to slip through the crowd, but it was too late. 2 security officers blocked his exit while Penner approached. Calm, methodical. The man mid-40s, lean, hair thinning, raised both hands. I didn't do anything, he said quickly. Not yet, Penner replied, showing his badge. But let's find out what you planned. Edward watched the scene from the stage, heart pounding. He saw Anna clinging to Marla, confused. Tobias pressed close to one of the nurses, scared but quiet. After the man was taken into custody, Penner gave a subtle nod from across the lawn. It was over. For now. That evening, Edward sat in his study with Nancy, Penner, and a local detective assigned to the case. His name is Clemens, the detective confirmed. He had surveillance photos of your house, your children, your car, but no weapons, no physical attempt to harm. Legally, it's a gray area. Edward clenched his jaw. So he walks? For now, the detective said. But with the evidence of harassment and the letters, we can press for a restraining order and possibly a charge of stalking. But if he's smart, he'll back off. Edward didn't look convinced. After everyone left, he sat alone in the quiet study, the only light coming from the fireplace. Then he heard soft footsteps. Anna stood at the doorway, her sunflower dress exchanged for pajamas, her bear under one arm. Is the bad man gone? She asked. Edward knelt and opened his arms. She walked into them without hesitation. He's gone, he said. And you're safe. She pulled back slightly. You're shaking. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Just tired. She nodded solemnly. You can sleep in my room tonight. It's safer when we're all together. Edward swallowed hard and nodded. That night, he lay on the floor of Anna's room beside Tobias's small cot, listening to their breathing. He stared at the ceiling, the shadows of the ceiling fan spinning like quiet echoes of the day. He didn't know what would come next. But he knew this. Whatever storms waited in the dark, he would meet them head on. Because now, more than ever, there was no going back. He was their shield, and he would not break. Morning came slowly, dragging light into the corners of Edward's home like a reluctant guest. The events of the previous day still clung to the air, whispers of fear, echoes of applause. The image of Anna's small frame pressed into his arms, asking, "Is the bad man gone?" He hadn't slept much, just watched the ceiling while Tobias's breathing rose and fell beside him like ocean waves. By the time the sun broke through the clouds, Edward was already dressed and on the phone with Penner. "Anything new on Clemens?" he asked, pacing the length of the study. "He lawyered up," Penner replied. "But we've got a solid case for harassment. We've pushed for an emergency restraining order, and we're recommending increased surveillance around your home. But there's something else." Edward stopped pacing. "He's not working alone," Penner said. Edward's grip on the phone tightened. "Who else?" "Nothing concrete yet," Penner said. But Clemens wasn't just watching. He was being fed information, personal things. "We believe someone with access to your records, your schedule, maybe even your staff, has been leaking intel." Edward's voice dropped. "You think I have a mole? I think someone wants to dismantle your credibility from the inside." Edward stood in the center of his home, once a haven, now a war zone, a place where safety could no longer be assumed. That same afternoon, Nancy Holbrook arrived in person, dressed in charcoal gray, briefcase in hand and fire in her eyes. "This isn't just about harassment anymore," she said, spreading a series of documents across Edward's desk. "The media has caught wind of Clemens's allegations. There's a journalist from the Ledger digging into Tobias's transplant. He's asking questions about the donor process, about how the match was made so fast." Edward pinched the bridge of his nose. "It was luck, desperation, and a miracle." "They won't frame it that way," Nancy said. "And the moment they publish, your image as a heroic father could fracture. Even if the claims are baseless, perception will shift. They're trying to poison the story before it becomes legacy. So, what do? We get ahead of it. Full transparency," she said. "We gather your legal team, the doctors who oversaw the transplant, and create a factual timeline. We build the wall before they can start throwing rocks." Do I go public?" Nancy paused. "Not yet, but we prepare for that possibility." By nightfall, Edward sat at the kitchen table with Marla, the same place where they used to share grocery lists and light conversations. Now, the air between them was heavy. "I need your honesty," he said. "Do you think anyone on our staff would betray us?" Marla didn't answer right away, then softly, "Not out of malice, but fear makes people foolish. And envy. That's a different poison." Edward nodded. "If you had to guess?" Marla looked down. "We've had 4 new hires since the custody battle. 2 temps. One of the nurses Tobias bonded with quit last week without notice. Left her badge in the mailbox." Edward's eyes sharpened. "Name? Paula Renner. Sweet, quiet, but something about her always felt off. Too eager." "Get Penner her file," Edward said. That night, after the kids were asleep and the house had quieted, Edward found himself in the garage, staring at his car. It used to be his escape, a sleek symbol of control, speed, status, but now, it felt irrelevant. The things he needed to protect couldn't be outrun. He sat behind the wheel, engine off, and dialed Dr. Morales at the hospital. "Late call," she answered, voice tired but kind. "I need you to tell me again," Edward said. "Everything about the transplant. How the heart was found. Who approved it. And whether there's anything someone could twist." She exhaled. "It was an anonymous donor, Edward. A young man, 23, killed in a motorcycle accident. His family had signed the donor card. The heart was a perfect match for Tobias. Nothing was rushed. No corners cut. Can someone fake that match?" he asked. "No," she said. "It was triple verified. If they try to discredit it, it'll be pure fiction. But that doesn't stop them from planting doubt." "Thank you," he said, voice thick. After the call, he just sat there, letting the silence wrap around him like a worn coat, letting the doubt pass through and out, like poison being bled. The next morning, Penner returned with updates. "Paula Renner's file is messy," he said. "Turns out she once worked for a private clinic in Louisiana that lost its license after a data breach. She was never charged, but she vanished from the records for nearly a year. We think she may have been feeding Clemens. Edward rubbed his jaw. So, she's the leak. We believe so, Penner said, and we think she's still talking to someone. Edward looked down the hallway, where Anna's laughter rang from her bedroom. That sound was everything, a fragile light in a darkening world. No more waiting, Edward said. Let's bring this into the light. Let them come. I'll face them all. Penner gave a slow nod. Then we prepare the field. That afternoon, Edward made the call to Nancy. I'll go public, he said. I'll tell the story, not because I owe them an explanation, but because Anna and Tobias deserve a future built on truth, not whispers. Nancy's voice was firm. Then we do it right. One press conference. One message. No spin. Just you. The truth. And the facts. Edward stood by the window, the wind ruffling the curtains. Across the lawn, Anna was teaching Tobias how to skip stones in the shallow pond, her giggles floating toward him like a promise. Let them try to take this away, he murmured. They'll learn I don't bend, not when it comes to them. He turned away from the window and stepped into the hallway, his walk slow, deliberate, like a man readying for battle. The war had arrived, and this time, it would be fought in the open. The sun over Brookwood had barely risen when the media trucks arrived. They rolled up the curved driveway in a slow, deliberate crawl, metal beasts bearing cameras, cables, and polished questions disguised as curiosity. By 9 a.m., the gates outside Edward Blake's estate were lined with reporters, technicians, and a few onlookers drawn by the scent of spectacle. Inside, Edward stood before the hallway mirror, adjusting his tie. He hadn't worn one in weeks, hadn't needed to. But today wasn't about comfort. Today was about command. Message. Clarity. Today was the day he took control of the narrative, before someone else rewrote it into something unrecognizable. Marla entered quietly behind him, holding a navy blue pocket square. You always looked sharp in this color, she said, offering it. He smiled faintly, folded it into his breast pocket. Thank you, Marla. For everything. Her expression softened. You don't need to say it. I do, because this story, if it ends well, it's because of you, too. They stood in still silence for a moment. The way family does when there are too many words and not enough time. Then Penner entered. They're ready when you are. Edward nodded and took one last breath. Let's begin. Outside, a platform had been set near the garden, beneath the old oak tree that had stood since before Anna was born. It wasn't grand or dramatic. It was deliberate, Edward's insistence. He wanted truth to feel rooted, not rehearsed. Nancy Holbrook stood beside the podium, already scanning the crowd, her expression unreadable but entirely in control. A small team of staff monitored live feeds and coordinated with networks. The press conference was being streamed nationally. Edward stepped up to the microphone as cameras clicked and murmurs hushed. He didn't wait for an introduction. He didn't need one. My name is Edward Blake. You know that already. What you may not know is how this began. He looked over the heads of the crowd toward the hospital in the distance. I was standing in a hospital lobby when a 6-year-old girl grabbed my hand and said, "Please save my brother." I didn't know her. I didn't know her story. But I knew one thing. I wasn't walking away. He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. That boy, Tobias, needed a heart. He got one. Not because of who I am or how much I have, but because of a series of events that aligned with precision and grace. The donor was real. The match was real. The doctors, nurses, and every step of the process real. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the folded letter from the hospital, the one confirming the match, the donation, the timeline. I'm here today because someone is trying to twist that truth into something ugly. A man with a grudge. A woman who leaked details. And a system that sometimes rewards noise over fact. He looked directly into the nearest camera. I'm not ashamed of what I've done. I've made mistakes in business, in life. But I will never apologize for saving that boy. For loving those children. For choosing to be their father. Nancy stepped forward, distributing packets to the press documents, testimonies, doctor affidavits, transplant verification, hard facts, paper armor. One reporter raised her hand. Mr. Blake, are you saying the allegations against you are entirely false? I'm saying, Edward replied calmly, that they're manufactured by people who would rather see a miracle torn down than believe it's possible. Another question came. Do you believe this is politically motivated? Edward answered. I believe fear is a powerful motivator. So is bitterness. I don't care what motivates them. I care about protecting my family. He paused, and if they come for us again, they better be ready for a fight they won't forget. The press murmured. Headlines were already being drafted in their minds. With no further questions taken, the conference concluded. Penner and Nancy quickly moved Edward away from the crowd, back into the house. Inside, Anna ran to meet him at the door. Were you nervous? She asked, peering up at him. He crouched down. A little. You didn't look it, she said. You looked like one of the superheroes in Tobias's comics. He smiled. Sometimes heroes just wear old suits. She giggled, then hugged him tightly. Can we have pancakes now? Absolutely. While the kids sat at the table, Marla flipping batter on the griddle, Nancy leaned in beside Edward with her phone. Watch this, she said. She hit play on a live broadcast replaying the press conference. On the screen, a host was already calling it a masterclass in transparency, while another reporter commended Edward for bravery under personal fire. Public response is leaning in your favor, Nancy said. The tide's turning. Edward exhaled for the first time that day. Not relief, but resolve. Later that afternoon, Penner returned with new intel. Paula Renner's disappeared, he said. She cleared out a bank account in upstate New York and booked a one-way flight to the Caribbean. No trace since. She'll resurface, Edward said, voice low. People like that always do when they think the storm's past. Penner nodded. In the meantime, you've bought breathing room, but stay alert. I always am. That evening, as the sky faded into a soft lavender, Edward sat outside on the porch swing. Tobias was asleep early, tired from school. Anna sat beside Edward, coloring under the golden light. Do you think people will stop being mean now? She asked quietly. He looked down at her, her small hands carefully drawing stars. I don't know, sweetie. But I know we're stronger than their meanness. She nodded slowly, then asked, Did you ever want to give up? He hesitated, then gave her the truth. I did. Once. A long time ago. But then I met you. She leaned her head against his shoulder. I'm glad you didn't. He kissed the top of her head. Me too. Night fell, and with it came a stillness that no longer felt threatening but earned, and as Edward sat with Anna beside him and Tobias safe upstairs, he realized something important. They weren't just surviving the storm. They were outlasting it. The calm that settled over Edward Blake's life in the days after the press conference was like the eye of a hurricane, brief, quiet, and too perfect. He knew better than to believe it would last. The news cycle had shifted in his favor, public opinion warmed, and even the Ledger printed a half-hearted retraction buried on page 6. But underneath the smiles, the nods, and the congratulations, Edward could feel it. The tension still lingering just beyond reach, waiting to snap. On a Tuesday morning, it snapped. It started with a phone call from the principal at Anna's school. She's fine, the principal said quickly. But there was an incident on the playground. Edward's blood turned cold. What kind of incident? She was confronted by a stranger outside the fence. A woman, said she was her aunt, tried to get her attention, offered her a ride. Edward didn't wait to hear the rest. He was already in his car, tires screeching against the pavement as he sped toward the school. When he arrived, Anna was in the counselor's office, curled on the couch with a cup of juice, and her bear clutched tightly. Her face lit up when she saw him, and she launched into his arms. She said she knew my mom, Anna whispered. She said she had pictures of me when I was a baby. Edward held her close, heart pounding. You did the right thing, staying inside. I'm so proud of you. I didn't talk to her, Anna said. I remembered what you said about strangers with stories. Back in the hallway, the school's security footage confirmed it. A tall woman, face partially obscured by sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat, loitering near the playground fence. She never stepped onto school property. But her intentions were clear. When Edward showed the footage to Penner, The former agent's face darkened. "That's not random," he said. She knew where to find her. She knew the schedule. "Is it Paula?" Edward asked. "Doesn't look like her," Penner replied, "but maybe someone working with her. Someone with an agenda." Nancy was furious when she heard. "They're escalating," she said. First it was media pressure, then threats. Now direct contact. "They're trying to rattle you, make you look unstable. If you react too strongly, they'll spin it. If you don't react at all, they'll push harder." "I'm done reacting," Edward said. "It's time to act." That night, after putting Tobias and Anna to bed, Edward stood in his study surrounded by files, security reports, and timelines. It was time to go on the offensive. He called a friend, Elias Granger, an investigative journalist with a reputation for tearing the mask off powerful liars. "I need you to look into something," Edward said. "Off the record for now. There's a woman, Paula Renner, and a man, Richard Clemens. I want to know how far this thing goes. I want to know who's funding them. Who's behind this whisper campaign." Elias didn't hesitate. "Send me everything you have." Within 48 hours, Elias had uncovered the first thread. "It's bigger than just those two," he told Edward over the phone. "There's a shell company in Florida funding Clemens's travel and legal fees. It's connected to a larger medical lobbying firm, one that's been lobbying against reforms you've supported. They don't want people like you setting a precedent that compassion beats capitalism." Edward felt the old fire return, the drive that had once helped him conquer boardrooms, now aimed at something far more personal. "I want names." "You'll get them," Elias promised. Meanwhile, Penner tightened security around the estate. Former military, former agents, rotating in shifts. Cameras were upgraded. Routes to and from school were randomized. Even Marla began carrying a discreet panic button on her keyring. But Edward knew they were buying time, not peace. One evening, as he was preparing dinner, his famous chicken and rosemary dish, Anna approached, unusually quiet. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Anything. If you knew all this would happen, being scared, people watching us, would you still have taken my hand in the hospital that day?" Edward didn't hesitate. 1,000 times. "Yes." She nodded, satisfied, but her eyes stayed on him. "Even if it gets worse?" Edward bent to her level. "I will never stop choosing you and your brother. Even if the whole world falls apart." She smiled then. "Good. Because you're the only dad who knows how to cut the crusts off my toast the right way." That night, he tucked her into bed, watching her drift off with the bear tucked under her chin. Then he stepped outside onto the porch where Penner stood, hands in his jacket pockets. "They'll try again," Penner said without looking at him. "I know. We need to be ready." "I am." They stood in silence for a long moment. Then Penner said, "When this ends, it won't be with a bang. It'll be a truth revealed. One so loud they can't silence it." Edward nodded. "Then let's make sure it's the right one." In the distance, a nightbird called. A wind moved through the trees, and inside that home built by tech, guarded by law, and now powered by love, 2 children slept safely, unaware that the final battle was drawing near, and their father was ready. The final morning came not with dread, but with clarity. For the first time in weeks, Edward Blake awoke before the alarm. Mind sharp, heart still. The night before had brought a peace he hadn't known in months. No threats, no shadows near the gate. Just the sound of Anna whispering to Tobias about dreams and dragons before sleep. And the feeling deep, unshakable that something was about to end. Or perhaps begin. In the study, Penner was already reviewing the latest findings from Elias Granger. A manila folder sat on the desk between them, thicker than the ones before, filled with names, account records, phone logs. "It's all here," Penner said, tapping the file. "The money trail leads back to North Star Medical Lobbying Group. One of their subsidiaries was backing Clemens. Renner, too. And the woman at the school? Former North Star employee, suspended for misconduct 3 years ago." Edward opened the folder. The faces, names, documents, each one a piece of the war waged in silence. They wanted to discredit me, he said. Not because of who I am, but because of what I represent. You gave the system a face, Penner said. A white billionaire adopting 2 black children. A miracle transplant. To them, that's dangerous. It gives people hope, and hope threatens power built on fear. Edward leaned back in his chair. It ends today. Later that morning, Edward sat with Nancy Holbrook and Elias in a private room at Channel 8 News. The network had agreed to a primetime segment live, unfiltered, and uncut. Not a press conference this time, a conversation. The final word, Nancy adjusted her blazer. This is the last time you'll need to do this. Speak truth. Be human. And let the facts speak louder than the accusations. Edward looked at her, then at Elias. Let's finish it. The cameras went live at 7 p.m. sharp. Across America, televisions lit up with the image of Edward Blake sitting in a quiet studio, no branding behind him. Just soft lighting and his own steady gaze. The host, a seasoned journalist named Angela Reed, began the segment with brief context, reminding viewers of the journey. A chance encounter in a hospital, a miracle transplant, and the storm of suspicion that followed. Then she turned to Edward. Mr. Blake, why speak now? He didn't pause. Because silence is how injustice survives. Because when people lie about who you are, and you let them, you become the lie. Angela leaned in. What's the truth then? The truth, Edward said, is that I didn't plan any of this. I didn't buy a heart. I didn't manipulate a system. I was simply there, in the right moment, when a little girl said, "Please, save my brother." And I listened. That's all. He pulled from his jacket pocket the hospital badge he wore that day. It had faded, frayed at the edges. But it still bore his name. This badge doesn't give me power, he said. It reminds me I'm accountable. Every day, to those 2 kids. To every parent who's ever sat in a waiting room and prayed. Angela nodded. We've learned that a network of individuals connected to North Star Medical attempted to undermine your story. Some are being investigated. Do you believe justice is being served? Edward looked into the camera. Justice isn't a verdict. It's a process. It's not about revenge. It's about truth coming out, and people being brave enough to believe it. That's happening now. The segment closed with Edward addressing viewers directly. If you've ever been told that you're not enough, that your story doesn't matter, I want you to remember this. I wasn't supposed to be their father, but I became one, not because of blood, but because love doesn't ask permission, it just shows up. The screen faded to black. Back at home, Anna and Tobias sat on the couch beside Marla, watching every word. Anna held her bear close, and Tobias, wide-eyed, whispered, "That's our dad." The response was swift. Within hours, social media flooded with support. Hashtags honoring Edward's courage trended nationwide. Messages poured in from strangers, adoptees, organ donor families, single parents, each sharing their own stories, their own versions of love found in unexpected places. The next morning, Edward received a call from the head of the National Transplant Ethics Board. "We owe you an apology," the woman said, "and a thank you. You've helped us realize that transparency isn't just good practice, it's moral obligation. You've changed something." Edward said nothing for a moment, then quietly replied, "Let's hope it stays changed." Days passed, then a week. Clemens and Renner were subpoenaed. North Star's CEO resigned. Investigations expanded. And just like that, the machine that once targeted him began to crumble from within. But Edward didn't linger in victory. He returned to his routines: pancake breakfasts, school pickups, late-night stories. The world outside could spin as it wished. Inside his home, he'd built something unshakable. One night, while tucking Tobias in, the boy asked, "Are the bad people all gone now?" Edward thought for a moment. "Some are. Some aren't. But they can't hurt us anymore." Tobias nodded, then whispered, "Even if I get sick again, will you still stay?" Edward felt a catch in his throat. Always. You're not alone anymore, buddy. Down the hall, Anna had left a drawing on his pillow. It was of their family stick figures beneath a sun. The words above it said, "We're strong because we stayed." Edward held the paper for a long time. In the end, the victory wasn't in headlines cleared or enemies exposed. It was in the ordinary, the slow rhythm of trust restored, of mornings undisturbed, of laughter echoing from bedrooms once filled with fear. The storm had come, but it didn't win, and as Edward stood once more on the back porch beneath the old oak tree, watching his children chase fireflies in the twilight, he whispered into the wind the truth he now knew fully. Love is the loudest answer.